Greetings and welcome to Module 1 Unit 5 of NATE, that is NBA Accreditation Teaching and Learning in Engineering. And here in the last unit we tried to understand the nature of self-appraisal report and the centrality of closing the quality loop at all levels of outcomes. As you can see, we are looking at the entire process of teaching and learning within some framework, and that framework is provided by two things. One is NBA accreditation, the other is outcome based education. These are the two pillars, you can say, of provide a framework for looking at all aspects of engineering education. So, in the last unit we looked at self-appraisal report and all the elements of that briefly mentioned, and then we looked at what are the central features of that. One of the central feature of that is closing the quality loop at all levels. While we are going to look at all the criteria in great detail in the module 3 of this course, but the last unit just presented a brief picture of the nature of the self-appraisal report. Now coming to unit 5, it's a long title that we gave, and the title is based on education, learning, assessment, teaching and instruction. And we use, as a teacher or as teachers, all of us use these words. Unfortunately, they are not used necessarily in the right kind of meaning or in right kind of context. So we felt that you reinterpret these words. These are all familiar words, all the words are known to everyone, but yet they are not necessarily used in the right context and to give the right meaning. And that is the reason why in this we try to we want you to reinterpret the familiar words: education, learning, assessment, teaching and instruction. And also one minor thing which we will again elaborate in later in module 2, understand the centrality of assessment in facilitating good learning. Now we start with the word education. It is not a new word, everyone uses all the time. We in our conversation we use it readily. But in a formal sense, if you want to define, education refers to, in its broadest sense, any act or experience that has formative effect on the mind, character or physical ability of an individual. That is, any kind of experience that has formative effect on the mind, character and physical ability of an individual, you can call it as education. So in this broad sense, the education never ends, because all the time you are experiencing, you are interacting with the outside world. To that extent, those experiences will have influence on your mind and character, and sometimes physical abilities as well. So in that sense, we truly learn from our experiences through our lives. So education happens all the time in our lives until our death. But here education in its technical sense now is the process in which society through schools, colleges and universities and other institutions deliberately transmits its cultural heritage, its accumulated knowledge, values, skills from one generation to the other. And that is the reason why one generation to another, that is the reason why the school education differs considerably from one country to the other, because each country will have to decide what is its which part of its cultural heritage it wants to transmit to the next generation of people. Education in the technical sense, we are looking at what happens in schools, colleges and universities or similar institutions. So, in our context, it is concerned with intentional learning like in schools, colleges and universities. So, when you enter a school or a college, they are expected to learn something. That means there is a curriculum and there is something is already decided by some process, and the student has to learn the things that have been already decided. Okay. So, to that extent education is concerned with intentional learning like in schools, colleges and universities. Now, we come to why should we be concerned with philosophy of education. So, somebody is deciding, society through some process is deciding to educate its people. But to educate people wisely, we must know what we educate them to become. For example, coming to engineering education for example, what kind of engineers do we want to produce? Is it something that you feel a group of people feel that they are, what is it that the student should learn, or is there any framework within which you make that decision? So, to know what we educate them to become, it is necessary to ask what can be the purpose of life and what sort of life it should be. This leads to the necessity to consider education philosophically. Again, translating that into engineering, what is the purpose of life of an engineer and what sort of life it should be? So, then you have to define who is a good engineer, which we made an attempt earlier in the first unit, saying that who is a good engineer, right. That our definition of good engineer, again that definition will depend on the context. Our context is at this point of time in India, based on the current state of affairs or current state of the society, what are the desirable characteristics of a good engineer? At some level people have to agree to some common call it parameters or characteristics of the good engineer, and that is the reason why you require to consider education philosophically. So, essentially educational philosophy involves the application of formal philosophy to education, and then the moment you come to philosophy, there is nothing like a single one or possibly any two people exactly will agree with what philosophy of education is, or for that matter what philosophy is. And broadly we have the following schools of philosophy: idealism, realism, pragmatism, existentialism and analysis. Even people may not agree with this kind of classification. This is one convenient method of classifying philosophies. So, one should agree, okay, pick one from here what you consider is appropriate to this. For example, at least at higher education, the philosophy of pragmatism is considered as the platform or basis for considering all issues related to education, let us say at higher level. We will not go through trying to define or defend any of these decisions, is only to bring it to the attention of the teachers that there are these five schools of philosophy, and one can look at their programs through any of these philosophies, but that is a completely different. Those who are interested are welcome to explore these philosophies in relation to engineering. Now, coming to higher education, what are the characteristics of higher education? One is their formal programs, that means somebody has a structure, like in our case there are 4 years, they are based on semester system, and there is a whole lot of things that it is a formal one. That means there is nothing like total freedom at all levels for both for teachers and students. And unlike schools, aims of higher education cannot be and are not that universal. By and large, what happens in a country, the aims of school education are broadly the same. There is not too much of difference between one place to the other place, whereas at higher education it need not be. There is no need for it to be the aims of higher education to be universal. That is one of the first characteristic of higher education. Universities and colleges offering higher education general programs will identify the aims called program outcomes. Okay. That is, if you are offering a course like BA in history or BA in sociology or a BSc in physics, any of these general programs, these what we consider the outcomes of the program are decided by the university or sometimes even the college. If it is autonomous, college itself is required to identify in today's context the program outcomes. In case of professional courses like engineering, the concerned accrediting agency will identify the program outcomes. That means it is not left to the choice of the college or university. There is a national accrediting agency. For example, if you take architecture or medicine, the so called program outcomes or the entire professional course is designed and given by the accrediting agency. Not only that, some amount of freedom is given to the department offering the program to add some more outcomes to this program outcomes. We call these additional outcomes as program specific outcomes. So, what happens in the case of program outcomes, they are the same across all disciplines, across all engineering programs, whereas program specific outcomes are specific to a particular branch, and that too they are defined by the department. Now, we come to the process of teaching. So, we looked at education, we looked at what is a higher education program, and now we look at the teaching. Teaching is a process of helping others to acquire knowledge, skills and values. That is what a teacher does. How does he do? Teaching is a process of attending to people's needs, experiences and feelings and intervening so that they learn particular things. These particular things are decided by the curriculum. What the student should learn are decided by the curriculum. So, teacher essentially does several things. That means he mainly intervenes. And what are these interventions? Interventions commonly take the form of questioning, listening, giving information, explaining some phenomenon, demonstrating a skill or process, testing understanding and capacity, and facilitating learning activities. such as note taking, discussions, assignment writing, simulations and so on. So, the interventions take several forms, and what kind of intervention is to be taken place is decided by the teacher. So, this is what teaching process is. So, to that extent there are any number of models of teaching. There in fact there are several classes of models. There are a large number of classes of models. Under each class you have several models again, and essentially it applies to mainly school education. So, models of teaching may help teachers to create conducive environments for learning. So, if I follow some model, then I can plan my classroom teaching according to that model rather than doing it arbitrarily. And models of teaching may help teachers to plan learning centered educational experiences. These also may simulate development of new and better forms of opportunities for education. Okay. A new teacher, for example, may identify the model of teaching that he would prefer to follow, and then plan his teaching within that framework. Now, this is one of the most popular model of teaching due to William Glasser, which was provided in 1962. It belongs to the what is called personal family of models of teaching. We will not elaborate the features of this personal family. And what are the features? The teacher should identify instructional objectives, and the teacher should also know the entering behavior of students. That means, what kind of students do you have, what abilities do they have, with what you call prior knowledge and skills they come into your class. This is what the teacher will have to identify, and then he follows certain preferred or selected instructional procedures, and then he assesses the performance of the students. These are the 4 characteristics of a teacher. I think any teacher can readily relate to all these 4. But you should notice the success of this model depends upon the competency and ability of the teacher in terms of skills like the formulation of objectives, use of proper strategies and techniques of evaluation. So, this Glasser model of teaching is meaningful or will be successful corresponding to the competency and ability of the teacher. So, the teacher has a major role to play if you are following Glasser model of teaching. Now, we come to the other process, namely the learning. So, here there are 2 actors are always, one is teacher, the other are students. So, when teacher teaches, the goal is to facilitate the students to learn. So, we must also understand what learning is. Learning is acquiring new knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, preferences or understanding. If any of these things happen, we are learning. As we learn, our conceptions of phenomena change and we see the world differently. If we do not learn adequately, then our view of the world may not change at all. It should be noted, possession of information is not synonymous with learning. If one reels out all kinds of facts and figures, that is possession of information, or I would say data, it is not synonymous with learning. Now, if you want a biologist's definition of learning, learning is stabilizing through repeated use certain appropriate and desirable synapses in the brain. We will spend 1 unit on the kind of role our understanding of the brain plays in learning. That we will do it at a later stage. Now, we look at only 3 important theories of learning. There are many theories of learning. We will just confine ourselves to 3, which these are the most dominant ones. In fact, the whole learning theory, first learning theory is behaviorism due to Watson. Their behaviorism considers learning is the acquisition of a new behavior through conditioning, and behaviorism believed when it was proposed in 1920s, there was hardly any proper understanding of the brain. So, they made an assumption, brain is a black box, the only thing that you can measure is what is it that you are what are the stimuli that you are giving and what are the responses of the individual. These are the only things that are measurable. The whole learning theory through behaviorism is based on stimulus and response, and then what kind of sequence of stimuli will lead to what kind of sequence of responses. Under what conditions can I bring out desirable response from the individual. So, that is the kind of approach that was taken, and quite a few of the practices of the schools and even at higher education level, they have been followed, they are based on the behaviorism. For example, if you repeatedly practice, your response to certain stimuli can be conditioned or can be improved. So, what happens, one of the consequences of this, you give practice problems. So, that issue, that particular method is the outcome of behaviorism. So, it is, while it is superseded by others, but still that is, it is not invalid, but it does not completely, behaviorism does not completely explain the behavior of individuals. Now, next is cognitivism. Piaget's rather he proposed first, and possibly tens of thousands of researchers have worked on this. Humans learn by generating knowledge and meaning through sequential development of their cognitive abilities, including recognition, recollection, analysis, reflection, application, creation, understanding and evaluation. So, we are going to focus much on the cognitivist approach to learning. For example, the cognitive processes focus on processing information. How do you process? We have given a long list, and that is where we will be looking at our taxonomy of learning is dominantly based on cognitivism. We will look at that in the later units. And the third one, important one, is called social constructivism. It is due to John Dewey, Brunner, Piaget and Vygotsky. It considers that learning occurs within a context, that itself is a part of what is learned. Though you are teaching the same technical topic, same subject in one well equipped classroom by an expert and in a good nice environment, or the one that you are teaching in a very ill equipped, ill qualified faculty member, the contexts are vastly different, and whatever the students learn, the impact of the context is also carried. So, you cannot what do you call, the context cannot be dissociated with what you learned, and to that extent knowing and doing cannot be separated, and learning is a process that is extended over time. We are just making very brief statements. Obviously, we encourage teachers to explore these 3 learning theories a little bit. I think every teacher should explore at least these 3 theories besides many other theories that exist. Okay. one is, it should be remembered, learning is a process that is extended over time. It just does not happen in a very short period that you explain and people seem to understand, seem to even solve the problem immediately, but it does not mean that you have learned. It takes considerable time for that to be completely internalized, and truly the learning is you can say actually learning has actually happened. It takes certain time, and this is the one teacher should pay attention. In the sense, one of the mistakes that is done is that the curricula at many places they are overloaded. As a teacher, you want your students to know all kinds of things, and as soon as something is kind of addressed in the classroom, you think that the learning has been facilitated. It does not happen, as it takes considerable time, especially the students with lesser cognitive abilities. It will take a lot of time. To that extent, the curriculum should be matched with the abilities of the student and the time required. And as a consequence of social constructivism, some of the learning methods that they have come, like discovery, hands-on, experiential, collaborative, project based and task based learning are the consequence of social constructivism. Now we come to another very important aspect of teaching and learning, assessment. The formal definition of assessment, it is a measure of performance. What do I measure to know that the student has learned something? Okay. And the another word, the associated word is evaluation. Evaluation is an interpretation of assessment. If the student has performed, let us say conducted an experiment, then evaluation is to determine how well he has performed, or can I associate some grade or mark or something with that with that performance. So assessment and evaluation are two different things. Unfortunately, many times these two terms are used synonymously. That should not take place. And also we consider, after we think we taught well in the classroom, the teaching and learning has taken place, and assessment or examination is a necessary evil. Actually, we now presently look at the centrality of assessment in learning. Our assessment tools tell students what we consider to be important. For example, if we consider some part of the subject is not important, we may not ask any questions or not conduct a quiz in that. So students will look at what kind of questions are being asked at various points during a semester, and they will accordingly prepare. That means through your assessment tools you are communicating to the students what you consider to be important. For example, I cannot in my examinations or tests, I cannot ask superficial questions and expect the students to learn something meaningfully or deeply. So assessment is the key. Teachers guide students to learn through their assessments. You can even say that it is a glue that links the components of a course, its content, instructional methods and skills development. And in fact, you can even say assessment drives student learning. I am sure you are all familiar with that. Always students prepare for the exams, right? And a teacher, in my opinion, has no right to say that students should not worry about exams, and they consider you should focus on learning and should not focus on examinations. If these two are different, then it is a fault of the teacher rather than the student. And learning well and performing well in the examinations or in assessments, they should be the same. That is the role of assessment. You should not, your assessment should not create any issue related to performing in examinations, and learning well should not be considered two different things. So, again to reinforce that, we are once again saying assessment should be in alignment with stated outcomes of education. And there are two types of assessment: formative assessment, assessment for learning, or educative assessment. Means when I am asking, when doing assessing formative assessment, I am trying to find out to what extent the student has learned, and that will also provide me the basis for providing feedback, and also to know how the student, to what extent they have learned. That means in formative assessment, you are not trying to use the results for grading or giving marks for that. Whereas summative assessment, that is assessment of learning, to find out what is it that the student has learned, you conduct a summative assessment. And I am sure that faculty are familiar with these two words, formative assessment and summative assessment. Now we come to instruction. This is another word. For example, we may use teaching and instruction bit synonymously, but instruction is slightly different. The purpose of instruction is to help people learn and develop, very simple. But learning and development can be in any of the four domains: cognitive, affective, psychomotor and spiritual. Let us say we keep the spiritual part a little aside, because we do not even know how to formally define and how to do any of the what you call prepare the students for it, or there can be several controversies over that. So, we will mainly look at the learning and development can be cognitive, affective and psychomotor. We will look at affective and psychomotor domains a little later. Learning can certainly occur without instruction. You do not require instruction at all. Like if you walk on the street, by just observing what is happening or reacting to external situation, you are learning something. So, learning can certainly occur without instruction, but instructional designers apply the principles of learning to the design of external events we call instruction. That means the instructor plans some external events to facilitate learning. These external events are planned based on some principles of learning. That is what the instructional designer do. And instruction is a set of events embedded in purposeful activities that facilitate learning, if you want a formal definition of instruction. Events can be external to the learner, like it could be a printed page, an instructor's lecture, or the activities of a group of students, or conducting in a laboratory and so on. Whereas internal mental events, that is directing attention, rehearsing, reflecting and monitoring progress, these are internal mental events. So, the teacher will have to pay attention to both for him to do good instruction. Now, there are what you call instructional system design, we call it ISD. There are models for instructional system design, and these models present a process a teacher or instructional designer can use to plan and prepare for instruction. There are many models, so and there is nothing like this is the most superior model or this is the only way to do, there is nothing like that. but people may prefer a particular ISD model. Different instruction design theories differ in the process used to apply those theories to particular situation. So, the process part can be different from one model to the other, and the example that we are going to take is what is called ADDIE. ADDIE is a short name for analysis, design, development, implement and evaluate, or there are several variants of the same. So, we are going to look at this particular instructional system design model, namely ADDIE. And now, as an exercise, we would like you to give your reasons why you should be concerned with philosophy of higher education, mainly to encourage you to read a little bit and say why you should really worry about philosophy of higher education. Which one of the learning theories you can relate to more in your experience and why? We talked about 3 learning theories, and you can explore more learning theories, and if you prefer you can say which is the one you can relate better. Why do you need to be concerned with assessment in engineering education and how? Give 2 examples of your approaches to instruction you felt led to better learning by students in the courses you taught. Write 100 words for each example, giving some evidence of better learning. This is, we would like to learn from you. If you are able to share your the results of your exercise, it will be a great learning experience for us as teachers. And in the next unit, we try to understand the nature of program educational objectives and program outcomes. We talked about outcomes, but these are all classified into 4 levels. We will look at these 2, namely program educational objectives and program outcomes. Thank you for your attention.